Welcome to the Eternal ROI podcast, where we share the real stories of workplace transformation. And now, here are your hosts, Will Stewart and Chris Patton.
Welcome to the show. So glad to have each and every one of you here watching and listening along. We're excited about this episode. I'm Will Stewart, joined by Chris Patton, CEO of His Way at Work. Hey, Chris.
How are you, Will?
Doing great. Doing fantastic. I'm super excited about this guest.
Today's a good one.
Yeah.
Mark Whitacre is our guest. Mark is currently the executive director at TFactor, which is a program, and Mark will tell a little bit more about it here when we get into the conversation. But it's a part of Coca-Cola Consolidated out of Charlotte, North Carolina. Huge business that is absolutely faith-centered, and you'll hear some things that those guys are doing. They do it right. They are exceptionally well run and very, very good at this whole topic of integrating faith into the workplace and doing it in a way that is impactful, but not offensive, not problematic. So they're ones to learn by. So yeah, I'm excited about the time we'll have with him.
Yeah, me too. And if someone's like, Mark Whitacre, that's a familiar name. I may have heard that.
Yeah.
There was a Hollywoodized version of his story in a movie called The Informant by that starred Matt Damon. So
Yep.
yeah, so this is going to be a great one. Let's bring him on. Mark, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Our pleasure. So let's talk a little bit about your role at TFactor, kind of what you're doing there, and then maybe we back up and get a little bit about your story. What led you to where you are today?
Yeah, I tell you, TFactor is a very exciting initiative at Coca-Cola Consolidated, and really the goal of TFactor is to transform workplace cultures around the globe. And we say for good, for God, and for growth. And it's really had a tremendous impact on hundreds of CEOs and senior leaders that we bring in and equip them with TFactor. So it's been a tremendous initiative, and it's really something that's really on the heart of the CEO of Coca-Cola Consolidated, Frank Harrison.
That's incredible. We get to talk to a lot of CEOs on this episode and on the show, and it's going to be great talking to you because you're not in that CEO role, but you get to talk to a lot of them, and you kind of get to be in those inner conversations and hear that. And I think you're going to be able to share a lot about their internal struggles and what they do to get to the point where they're using their business for good, for God, and for His glory.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. But I do have quite a bit of senior leadership experience. I've been speaking for Coca-Cola Consolidated TFactor for the last couple of years at all of their events, but I just joined them the last 8 months full time. But prior to that, I was COO of CBMC Christian Businessmen Connection, and also COO of a cancer research company, a biotech company called Cypress Systems. So I've sat in the seat at a lot of your audience, especially the COO role.
Right.
Yeah. And so your path to get to this point has been quite a serpentine path, hasn't been straight at all. Let's talk a little bit about just what got you there. Let's start from the kind of the beginning of your story and tell us a little bit about what led you to where you are today.
Well, I tell you, my story, my journey, probably the most significant part of my journey has started when I was age 32, and that was 5 years ago, by the way.
Right.
That was about 30. That was about 30 years ago. I'm 63 now, but 31 years ago, I was for 8 years the divisional president of Archer Daniels Midland, ADM, one of the largest companies in the world. We were number 56 on the Fortune 500. They're number 41, I think, on the Fortune 500 today. So this is a Fortune 50 company. When I joined them, we were $70 billion in revenue and 30,000 full-time employees. So a huge company. It'd be difficult for your listeners to go to the grocery store without buying something from ADM. They have food ingredients and beverages like Coca-Cola. They have food ingredients in Kellogg's, Kraft, Pillsbury. It'd be almost impossible to buy a food or beverage at the grocery store that doesn't have something from ADM in it. And I joined them in 1989. I was there 8 years, as I mentioned. I was divisional president of the biotech division, the fastest growing division of the company, and corporate vice president of the whole company. And we had a 75-year-old CEO, a 69-year-old president, So there were 3 executives above me, and they were all double to triple my age. Wow. So all I could see is, boy, I have to be patient. I'm 32, and they're, between 69 and 75, and plenty of room for me to move up. And I didn't know God at that time. I mean, this is really an example of selfish leadership. This stage of my life.
Yeah, and what was that mix of the position, the money, the youth, and then not knowing God at the time? What was that life for you like then during that time?
Oh, I tell you, it was. You see these rock stars that crash because they get so much wealth at an early age, or an athlete, football or basketball at early age, and obtain so much wealth and they crash. I was definitely one of those people at 32 years old, a base salary at $350,000 a year. This is 1989, too. Keep in mind, it's 31 years ago. But with stock options and bonuses, it was $2 or $3 million a year for 8 years that I was there. 2 or 3 million every year. I'd be equivalent to like $8 to $10 million a year today.
Wow.
And I bought a mansion with an 8-car garage, filled it with 8 cars. The Ferrari, the BMWs, had horse riding stables where my kids rode inside during wintertime, horses in an inside arena. I bought the CEO's home. He lived there for 30 years, wanted something smaller. So I bought the CEO's home. The first month I was there, I had a corporate jet. The 7 top executives each had their own jet. And I'm telling you, I was Justin Bieber before Justin Bieber. I really thought I was Bon Jovi at that time, blonde hair blowing in the wind, the whole bit. And it really, at that point when I really thought, this is it. I mean, I'm at the pinnacle of my career. This is everything, and I've worked hard to reach. Yeah. In reality, I was at the first steps of my self-destruction at that time.
Yeah. That's such a strong draw, especially for business owners, CEOs, people that are motivated, and people that are go-getters. They want to be leadership in their business, and can be a very strong draw. Sounds like the happiness wasn't there to meet the joy of what we would think is like you arrived, but you weren't happy.
No, you're right. I mean, at that position 8 years, and I was already divisional president when I joined in '89. Yeah. So for that entire 8 years, I had that position and that compensation and that home and that corporate jet. And I'm telling you something, each time I get another bonus, which we usually would during performance, each quarter during performance, depending on how much revenue growth, profitability growth, and so on. And each time I would say, I'd buy another car and add another addition onto our house. And I would be saying, what's next? There's got to be more to life than this. I mean, I think I could have got to the level of Bill Gates during that time, and I still think I would be saying, what's next?
Yeah,
sure.
I had a void in my heart the size of Grand Canyon when most of the world would drive by our home and say, that guy has everything.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
So what happened?
Well, I mean, what basically happened is about 3 years into with ADM, about my 3rd year there, the CEO then was 78 years old. The president then was 60 or 72 instead of 69. And I would have been, just right before I turned 35, I would have been 34 years old at this point. And they gave me this huge bonus, 7-figure bonus. And it was at a time it wasn't performance related. So I thought it was odd to get it, but I was so greedy, I wasn't going to go chase him down and give it back. But about an hour later, the vice chairman who I reported to came back to my office and said, Mark, you've been with us a couple of years now. We trust you. We see you as family. We're going to start bringing you into how we do business. And I thought, well, I've been here a couple of years. I know how you guys do business. He said, no, we have a cartel. We fix prices of our ingredients, a lot of our key ingredients with competitors around the world. And we've really not shared that with you. But now that we trust you, now you're family, and with your age, you're going to have to take this over at some point. And we're going to start mentoring you and start equipping you where you can take this over. And this was literally an hour after I had a $100,000 check and 25,000 shares of stock given to me. That 25,000 shares was about $800,000. So between the two, it was just short of $1 million. And I thought, boy, now I get what it's about. It's, for me to move up, I'm going to have to do this. But I'm telling you, the compensation was so important to me at that point in my life. I wasn't willing to walk away. And I thought, well, if these guys are doing this and it's 30 years as CEO, this must be the way business is done. They know a lot more than I know. So I started rationalizing this is simply how business is done. So I jumped in hook, line, and sinker, started learning about the price fixing scheme, went to all the price fixing meetings, started, being mentored on how I eventually could head up this international cartel to fix the prices of all of our food ingredients that go into your listeners' foods all around the world. And then I shared it with my wife about 7 months later. I shared it with my wife, and the world changed.
That's the part of the story that gets me. She's the real hero here. But yeah. I want you to dig into that, right? So you guys have been married how long at this time?
We've been married 41 years now. We met when we were in 7th grade and 8th grade.
Wow. So at that point in time, you've been married 10, 12 years, somewhere in there?
I guess probably 92. We would have married about 13, 14 years at that point. We got married in 79. So about 13, 14 years when I shared that with her.
So what was her response?
Well, I tell you, she noticed something was changing those 7 months that I was in the price fixing scheme, and I was kind of learning, being mentored to eventually take that over. She's known me since I was 14 and since she was 13. And she knew me well, and she knew something was changing those 7 months. It's different than the previous couple of years that I was with ADM, Archer Daniels Midland. Something changed. And she set me down one night. It was November 5th, 1992. And she said, Mark, what's going on with your life? And I said, Ginger, we live in a mansion. We fly around on corporate jet. We got eight cars in the garage, Ferrari, Mercedes, BMWs, you name it, $2 million worth of cars. I said, if there's a heaven, this is it. And she said, Mark, I'll tell you something. This is not heaven. She became a Christian about a decade before that. So she became a Christian years before me. And I said, well, what do you mean, Ginger? I mean, how can I do any more for my family, you and our three young children than this? And I go to private schools. And she said, you know what, Mark, I'd rather have 2 Fords in the driveway, a 2,000 square foot house instead of 13,000 square foot. And I'd rather have my husband back. Wow. She said, I've lost my husband through this journey, and something's changed these last 7 months. And I shared with her how they were mentoring me to take over the price fixing scheme. And the reason why I'm on the phone 3 or 4 hours every evening the last 7 months, because a lot of our competition was in Southeast Asia, Japan and South Korea and Singapore, and they're 12 hours ahead of us. So 8 o'clock at night in Decatur, Illinois, where ADM's world headquarters are, was 8 in the morning the next morning in Asia. So that's why I was on the phone at night. And then she asked me the question. She said, well, aren't those your competitors? I said, yeah, they're my competitors, but they're teaching me how to take over this cartel, international cartel. And then she started asking lots of questions about it. And I told her, she asked me how much money was involved. And I said, well, we earn about an extra $1 billion a year, not $1 million, but $1 billion a year from this scheme. She said, gosh, you're $70 billion in revenue. Why would you steal $1 billion? Boy, isn't that the definition of greed? Wow. It's never enough.
Yeah.
And but I didn't say that then, obviously. I just said, well, this is what the company does. They've been doing it for 12 years. If I'm going to move up in the company, this is what I've got to do. And she said, boy, Mark, that just sounds outright thievery to me. And she said, who pays for the $1 billion theft a year? And I told her, I said, well, basically the consumers pay for it. If Hershey's pays more for an ingredient or Kellogg's cereal, that really gets passed on to the consumer. They have their profit margin built in. So she said, you mean my grandma on $200 a week Social Security is paying for this? And we live in a mansion? She said, Mark, I don't know if I can live with this. Then she said she was going to go back in her study and pray about it. We talk about it later. I knew then I was in trouble. But she came back about 2 hours later and she said, God led her to a decision. And the decision was to turn me into the FBI. She said, you're involved with a massive crime for 7 months. It's been going on for 12 years. She said, that's the perfect time to turn yourself in.
Wow. Man, thank God for her.
Yeah,
she really
absolutely.
saved
I mean, at
you.
that time I was really, obviously upset. I didn't see it that way. Thank God for her. At that time, I thought I've got myself in the middle of a nightmare here. But looking back, I know it was the right thing to do. I just was not willing to walk away from that opportunity at ADM. I mean, a couple of those executives above me were billionaires, and I was really looking 20, 30 years, I could be them.
Sure.
That was my target.
Yeah.
So how did you
Very
respond?
selfish leader.
How did you respond, and what happened next?
Well, I told her, I said, Ginger, if we do this, if I turn myself in, I said I could go to prison because there's antitrust laws on the book for price fixing. But I said, more importantly, I'm more concerned really about what the company will do. I said, our CEO is best friends with President Clinton, who was president at the time. I said, he picks the phone up on a regular basis and talks to President Clinton. I said, this CEO is a billionaire, been there 30 years. They will destroy us. I'm more concerned what they will do than the government. But I said, they will destroy us. And she came back quickly and she said, you know what? God will protect us. She said, her CEO is bigger than my CEO. And I said, Ginger, who's your CEO? And she said, Jesus. And I said, Ginger, I can't see Jesus. I can't feel Jesus. But I know my CEO lives a few miles down the road and they're going to destroy us. And she said, well, God will protect us. This is what's going to happen. And you're going to be doing it within 2 hours. I've already made the appointment.
Wow.
My goodness.
That's incredible.
So 2 hours later, we're sitting with the FBI. I don't know how many of any of your listeners that went to the FBI and told them they're stealing $1 billion a year, but I can tell you it's an interesting reaction. This became the largest price fixing case in U.S. history, started by a stay-at-home mom raising 3 young children, started by my wife.
Wow.
That's incredible. So what'd they have you do?
Well, first I sat with the FBI. We sat for 4 hours. We were young and naive. We had no attorney with us or, things that about anybody in their right mind would do, walk in with attorneys and none of that. We were, like I said, we were in our early 30s and naive. And so we sat there for 4 hours. The FBI first asked me, said, now, what are you in here for? Tell me a little more about this. And I said, it's really nothing. You've got so much more important things you guys can be doing. So much bigger things. This is a waste of your time. We shouldn't be here. And my wife said, well, he told me he's stealing $1 billion a year. And then he said, $1 billion a year. And then he said, well, how long's this been going on? And I said, I'm telling you guys, you got a lot more important stuff you can be doing than this. And it hadn't been going on that long. It's not that big of a deal. Then my wife quickly said, he told me it's been going on for 12 years, $1 billion theft for 12 years in a row. So he should have just interviewed my wife and left me out of it because
No kidding.
By the end of it, I had a choice to either be arrested that day because I was the only one confessed or wear a wire starting the next. And I thought at that time it'd be a lot more beneficial to wear a wire. They said I'd have to wear a wire for about 6 weeks. That's it. 8, 9, 10 hours a day, all day when I'm at work for about 6 weeks. I met 4 FBI agents at 6 o'clock every morning. They'd shave my chest, wire me up every day for 3 years, 1992 to 1995.
My goodness.
Every day, Monday through Friday for 3 years.
Was that stressful to?
Oh, the stress was unbelievable. I mean, prison was a cakewalk, federal prison compared to wearing a wire. It was the most stressful 3 years in my life. I lost about 60 pounds. People at work thought I had cancer. I mean, I was falling apart. I was having a nervous breakdown because the FBI, when they wired me up, they said, Mark, if these guys catch you, they're going to kill you. This is serious stuff. And I knew who I was dealing with, both U.S. and internationally, and some of them would have killed me if they knew I was wearing a wire.
My goodness. So
very stressful.
Fast forward through that 3.5 years and you get to the end. You mentioned prison was a cakewalk compared to that. So clearly you spent some time there. What happened once the 3.5 years was over? What were the next steps?
Well, they gave me a 6-month plea agreement for all the work. The others were all going to go to prison. About 30 people were convicted in this case of all the different organizations, 4 from ADM, about 30 total. That most of them were going to go to prison for several years. They were giving me a 6-month plea agreement. I would go to prison the least of anyone. And my lawyer, we were sitting in Chicago, and my attorney, we hired an attorney once the case went public. We did not have one the entire time I wore a wire for 3 years. But when it went public, we had an attorney. He said, Mark, here's a deal of a lifetime, 6 months plea agreement. Sign it and get this behind you. You go to prison at age 40 and you come out at 40. And I looked at my wife and said, I can't imagine doing 6 months in prison. And she said, Mark, sign it. Let's put this behind us. I looked at Ginger and I said, Ginger, you're the one that I'm in this mess in the first place. I'm going to do the opposite you want me to do. And I ripped up that plea agreement, and I fired that lawyer on the spot and hired other lawyers and went to trial instead. And I ended up with a 8.5-year sentence instead of 6 months by not taking that plea agreement. Okay. I was my own worst enemy every step of the way, by far.
But God used that for what's next.
Yeah. I tell you, when I knew I had 8.5 years and I would have went for 6 months, I pulled my car in one of those garages and I tried to take my own life. I wrote a 17-page letter to Ginger and my children, and I just thought, I can't do 8.5 years from age 40 to 49 in prison. I can't do it. And I tried to take my own life, and I was hospitalized for a month. I was treated for post-traumatic stress disorder. I was treated for bipolar disorder, some of the things that happen when you wear a wire for 3 years, 10 hours a day for 3 years. And I was treated for about a month. The judge gave me 7 months before I had to go back, before I showed up and entered a federal prison camp, a white collar camp. And during that time, two individuals were reading about me, because this was a very, like a Martha Stewart, Enron, WorldCom, is a very high profile case. It was in the news a lot. And there were two individuals that were reading about it. And one of them was named Ian Howes, a CFO of a pharmaceutical company. And the other one was Chuck Colson. And those two guys reached out to me, Ian first and then Chuck Colson, and planted a seed that introduced me to God that changed my life forever. I became a Christian my 3rd month in prison, being discipled, being mentored by both Ian Howes and by Chuck Colson. Chuck Colson was the lawyer, that White House counsel who worked for President Nixon during Watergate, who went to prison. He became a Christian during that time. So it's amazing how God used him to disciple me and to pour into me. And my 3rd month in prison, after those two guys discipling me for months, Ian started 7 months before I entered prison. Chuck Colson showed up my 2nd week in prison. And so my 3rd month in prison, I surrendered my life to Jesus. I just turned 41 the month before that. And here I'm $20 a month for 8.5 years after earning $2 or $3 million a year for 8 years. Now I'm $20 a month for 8.5 years. And it's amazing. I became a free man in prison.
Wow.
And I mean, it's amazing. I just felt, when I surrendered my life to Jesus, I knew it would not be an easy path, but I felt like God will carry me through this. And I tell you, God took our life from ashes to beauty during that 8.5 years. I mean, the divorce rate, if you serve 5 years and longer, the official statistic is 99% divorce rate. Well, we're married for 41 years, and I did 8.5 years. So I had a 99% divorce rate on my head. Ginger moved each place, 3 different states with our children, and visited every Friday evening, all day Saturday, and all day Sunday, which is the only time families can come in a visiting room in federal prisons. With good behavior, you move to better places. So I started off Yazoo, Mississippi, and then to Edgefield, South Carolina, a better place. And then my last 5 years on a Navy base in Pensacola, Florida, and heard my kids move to each place, visited me every weekend, even with a 99% divorce rate. The victims of the case, Coca-Cola won $400 million from the price fixing a class action suit. Tyson Foods, $80 million. ADM paid billions of dollars back to these clients. And we lost almost everything we had in legal fees and fines. I mean, I went from a millionaire to broke by the time we went to prison, sold our home and cars to pay attorneys. And they gave my wife a whistleblower reward for turning me in. The companies I stole from paid my wife a whistleblower reward that financed my wife and kids for 8 years when I was in prison. The very people I stole from financed my family.
That's amazing.
A miracle of God.
Yeah.
No doubt.
That's incredible. Yeah, it's amazing how God has took care of you every step of the way. Once you got out of there, and now you're a free man, both in spirit and physically. I know you probably had a new mission, a new path, a new trajectory. What was your new mindset?
Yeah, even in prison, I must say. I mean, once I surrendered my life in June of '98, which was my 3rd month in prison. I've been out for almost 14 years now. I went in June of '98 and got out in 2006, 14 years ago. But even that first year in prison, when I still had 8 years ahead of me, God used that. I had a PhD biochemistry from Cornell, And, I threw that. When you get involved with illegal activity, you take 8 years of education and you're throwing it in the trash can because you got to the fork of the road and you went the wrong way. But God used that education. I was an inmate in the education department, which never happens. They put me in the education department to basically to teach inmates and help some get their GED. Some of them get 2-year degrees through correspondence. And here I'm at $20 a month. And I felt, boy, this is really rewarding. I mean, it's like the first time in my life I was helping someone else besides myself, and learn how rewarding that was. So I would say I never had a taste of being a servant leader until I went to prison. And I found how rewarding that was. And I stayed on that track when I got out 14 years ago.
That's fantastic.
Wow.
So from prison, out of prison, all the way up to work with TFactor, what did you do in between?
Yeah, when I got out of prison, I tell you, Cornell University was also reading about me in the newspaper, and some of those professors became Christians during that journey. They weren't Christians when I was there, but they became Christians over those years, and they started visiting me in prison, and they started bringing biotech. With me having a PhD in biochemistry, they started bringing biotech executives there, and companies would have me review their patents and strategic plans, and a couple of them offered me jobs the day I got out of prison.
Wow.
Just started jobs, like someone coming right out of the university. And I joined a company called Cypress Biotech because a Christian CEO, and I didn't want to fall back in that greed trap. So I wanted to have the right mentors and the right people around me to hold me accountable. So I joined that particular company, and after 4 promotions, I became the COO, number 2 executive of that company, a cancer research company. Then I was also active in CBMC, Christian Businessmen Connection, because Ian Howes is one of the ones that reached out to me along with Chuck Colson. He was part of CBMC. And so I also joined CBMC and spoke around the country at their events and prayer breakfast events and so on. And I became COO of CBMC as I was still working at Cypress Biotech for a big part of that. And then this past year, I've been speaking for the last couple of years for TFactor for Coca-Cola Consolidated, sharing the story of selfish leader versus servant leader. And I joined them full time this past 8 months, the beginning of 2020.
That's fantastic.
Huge. I mean, and TFactor is all about equipping leaders, how you integrate your faith in work, and looking at your work that it's God's, and there's no better place to integrate your faith than the workplace.
That's right.
Yeah.
We've heard from multiple CEOs we've talked to, Mark, and you're hearing some of the same things, but we can impact more people through the marketplace, through business. They don't have to go to church, but they usually have to have a job. And so we can impact them where they're working. And so I know you're doing tremendous things at TFactor. I'd love to hear, what have your first 8 months looked like? What have you been doing during that time? TFactor's been around, I know, at least 7 or 8 years, because I actually attended there as a student. I was from the family car business back in 2013. So I know it's been going on quite a while, but what's your job look like the last 8 months?
Oh, it's been exciting, and we're really scaling up, and especially with the current situation, it's hard to have in-person events like we had in the past. So we're doing a lot of virtual events, but the virtual events has really allowed us to scale up. Like this next event that we got coming up, we've got 25 already from Europe. We had several from Mexico in our previous event. So we're scaling up internationally. Virtually is allowing that. We're allowed to have bigger groups because when we had the events at our headquarters, there was so limited in space. We could usually allow about 50 senior leaders, 50 CEOs and senior leaders. Now this next event, we're going up to 200. So we're scaling up. We're getting influencers from all around the world as part of the event. So it's really allowed some, even though there's no doubt it's a tragedy what's happened with the whole virus and COVID and so on, and the number of people that have been impacted and even died from it. It's a tragedy. But God has really been using that to equip leaders, and more leaders than even we could in the past in the in-person event.
Yeah. So your first 8 months, I know you've been calling quite a few CEOs and past attendees at TFactor, and TFactor typically is a 1.5 day-ish when it's in person, kind of a conference where Consolidated takes the CEOs and leaders through how they integrate their faith into the work. But for the last 8 months, you've been calling CEOs and those that have been to previous events, and you're basically doing follow-up, finding out what's going on with them, what are their what actions are they taking, that kind of thing. Share with us some of what you're hearing. What are some themes going on in those calls?
Yeah, a couple things. One, we spend a lot of time in recruiting for our future events, like one coming up in a couple of months, and will be our first 200 leader event. So we're doing a lot of recruiting, and then the follow-up. We've talked to hundreds, I think, well over 400 now, different executives that've been to some of the past events in the last 18 months, and I tell you, that's why I really excited about interviewing with Chris and Will, because his way at work has been a huge factor. I mean, we look at some of the execution and putting an operating system in place, and what his way of work does. Some of our biggest success stories have been where his way of work has been involved with the execution of TFactor. Because at TFactor, we share about how we have chaplains at our 102 plants. We have 65 chaplains from Corporate Chaplains of America, a great partner also, representing our 102 plants, or really shepherding our 102 plants. And also at our headquarters, we have corporate chaplains too. Then we talk about prayer groups. We talk about changing our purpose statement. Like our purpose statement is to honor God in all that we do. So to honor God in everything that we do. And so we talk about that someone really should have God in their purpose statement. And a lot of these companies that attend TFactor do that. They change their purpose statement. They change their mission statement. They are chaplains. They join C12 groups, peer advisory groups. They use his way at work to help execute all this and put an operating system in place where you've got somebody responsible for each step of this process, where it's not just an activity, but where it's a sustainable model by having an operating system in place. So I feel like we have the right resources with groups like his way at work and right partners. And I feel when we looked at and talked to these hundreds of past attendees, we've learned that 68% implemented something from TFactor within 90 days after they left the equipping opportunity.
That's excellent.
And the ones that we saw with his way of work involved with, I mean, it was multiple activities and really built a tremendous model that's sustainable.
Sure. That's great. So what are some of the challenges you're hearing from these CEOs that have either attended or prior to attending? What are they telling you some of their struggles are?
Well, some of the challenge, some of the things we teach in TFactor, besides prayer groups, we talk about giving, both of your time, treasure, really of all three, time, treasure, and talent, not just writing a check and being a donor, but really giving of your time too. So we talk about giving and what that looks like for time, treasure, talent, talk about chaplaincy. We do spend quite a bit of time. It's a 4.5 hour event when it's virtual. It's, as Chris said, it's a day and a half when it's an in-person event, but we have the same topics in our virtual event. They're just more condensed in the virtual, and that's why we can do them in 4.5 hours. But a key component is legal. So probably some of the main questions we get in the beginning at TFactor, and also some of the follow-up questions after, what they can do legally. And it's amazing what they can do. We're a public company, and
Sure.
We're integrating faith in our workplace, and we've changed our culture to be a faith-friendly workplace. The key is you have to make it optional. You can't force somebody to join the prayer group. You can't force someone to use a corporate chaplain, but it's an option. It's an option you're offering. So a lot of the initial questions are really on the legal aspects. What can we do legally? And once they see that they can do it and they can do it legal, once they hear from our attorneys at TFactor and some follow-up, sometimes they talk to our attorneys after TFactor. Once they got that, then they really get excited about executing. And really, Chris, you guys have been a great job, and you guys have done a great job in helping some of those with very successful executions.
Sure. Yeah. So I have heard some of the same things where the first exposure a CEO has to this whole idea of faith in the workplace, in many cases, they say, the ones I talk to will say, well, I'm getting involved, I'm taking my faith to church. I'm going into the community. I'm getting involved in various boards around town. We donate money to various things. in the community and even internationally. But I'm having a problem internally because I'm just scared I'm gonna offend somebody and they're gonna sue me and I'm gonna lose my business. And I watch TV and I see the baker who can't, chooses not to design a wedding cake for a certain type of wedding, and they get sued. And I see all these things going on. I'm just scared to death. And legal is just, it scares me, and I just don't want to go there. And clearly what you're seeing some of the same stuff. But I think what we've learned, and part of this I learned at TFactor, what we've learned is as business owners, we have so many more rights, even as Christians, than we ever think we do, right? I mean, we can do so much as long as, like you said, we make it optional, as long as we make reasonable accommodations, I think is another phrase that they taught us here. And we can do all of these things if we are consistent. It's where we get inconsistent or try to demand somebody does something or require participation or start gauging them, counting their participation and using it with compensation or performance reviews, that kind of thing. So I appreciate you bringing that up because that is a big issue. And I'd encourage any listener to dig into that. Look at the TFactor website. They may have some information there. ADF, which is Alliance Defending Freedom, is a resource there. We can, His Way at Work can talk to you as well. But don't allow that to be a stumbling block or an obstacle to you engaging your faith in the workplace, because in reality, it's a false obstacle. It's really not. It should not be keeping you from it.
Yeah, the U.S. law, the law here in the United States is very clear. You can have a faith-friendly workplace. You can have it where your employees and your teammates bring their whole self to work. The key is you can't force it.
Right.
That's the key.
Right. Yep.
So why should a CEO care to have faith in the workplace? Why is that so important to have a culture like that?
Oh, I just described the culture that I was a part of at ADM.
Sure.
That got involved in price fixing. Here you had 30,000 people come to work doing the right thing every day. And then you got 4 bad apples at the top, myself, one of those 4. And look what it did to that corporation. I mean, it exists today and it's even stronger today, but it took 10 years to get that cloud away from it. It really did, to remove that cloud versus a culture of like Coca-Cola Consolidated that's over 20 years, have been having a faith-friendly culture. They started Chaplaincy over 20 years ago. Then you've got better retention rate of your employees. They want to stay. They're more positive about their work. They're absent less, so they show up work more often. They work more harder. They more hard when they are at work. I mean, it changes the culture. It impacts your return in your company, your return on your investment. It's a positive impact on your business. It is good for your business to have a good culture. No. There's nothing more important really than culture in a company.
Yeah. So let me ask you this, Mark. Let's say I'm a CEO and I take a slightly different approach or a different mindset, and I say, okay, I hear what you're saying, ADM as an example, but I'm not. My business is not ADM. Our business is simply neutral. I'm not going into the faith side of it because I'm scared of the legal or there's some other issues. I just don't know enough. But as long as I remain neutral and just do the right thing and do it morally well and I don't physically bring faith into it, shouldn't I be okay? Or is there something I'm missing? How would you respond to
you're still
to
really
like
missing something, because what happens is then your employees are really not able to bring their whole self to work. They're masking and they're covering up their faith and they're hiding it, and they shouldn't have to. They shouldn't have to. And then looking about when you allow your employees to bring their whole self to work, look what it's also doing for the kingdom, besides good for your business, by having your employees happier and more motivated and excited to be part of your company. And therefore the retention rate's higher and the motivation's higher. So therefore the work output is higher. But in addition, just think about from a kingdom perspective, the ones that work at your company that don't know God. Well, they see these ones that are bringing their whole self to work, and they see their actions are different. And then they come up to you. I've had many people over these last 14 years I've been out and come to me and say, boy, Mark, you do so much differently when we're going through adversity. How do you do it? And then you're able to share your faith and share your testimony. You don't run across the hall and say, let me share my testimony with you. But there are these opportunities that God creates, puts people in your path that don't know him, and they got something heavy on their heart that they're going through, and they start sharing with you. Well, then you're able to share, you know what? Let me tell you what I went through 30 years ago and how I got through it, and how God took my life from ashes to beauty. Everyone as a believer has a testimony, and they're able to share their story, how God changed their life and how God transformed their life. So not only is it good for the company, it's good to advance the Great Commission, because I really feel strongly there's no better place for ministry than our work. Matter of fact, if you look at Scripture, Jesus is 132 times went public in Scripture. He's in public appearances 132 times. Did you know 122 of those, 92% of Jesus's public appearances were in the marketplace?
No kidding.
Not at the synagogue, not at the temple, but the marketplace. 92%, because he went where the people were. He went where the lost were and the unconvinced. He showed us firsthand that there's no better place for ministry than the workplace. And he showed us so much that even the 12 disciples, where did they come from? They all came from the marketplace, just like us.
That's a great point.
That's good.
So you talk about Coke. We some of the listeners may be familiar with Coke Consolidated, but give us a quick bio on that company. You said it's a public company, but what size? I mean, I know you mentioned 102 plants, I think, but what size company?
102 plants.
And tell us a little bit about the dynamics of the company itself, because I think that in some cases now it'll be hard for most of our listeners to identify with operating or leading a company this size. But at the same time, there's some validity and credibility when a company as large as Coke Consolidated does this for the last 25 plus years, operates this way, and doesn't see a single lawsuit or a single issue, right, that is threatening the business, so to speak. So give a little sense of the scale of that company and what all you see there.
Yeah, we have just shy of 17,000 employees at Coca-Cola Consolidated. 102 plants, as you just mentioned, plus our corporate offices there in Charlotte, which has a couple thousand people just at that location out of the 17,000 employees. $5 billion in revenue, $5 billion on the NASDAQ as a public company, and U.S. law supports us 100% to be bold, to allow people to to actually not allow, but to encourage to bring your whole self to work. And that's why we do mentorship and discipleship through what's called radical mentoring. That's why we use chaplaincy and 65 chaplains shepherding these 102 plants, prayer groups throughout the country, throughout the company. Also giving, and really giving is very important for Coke, both from a company standpoint and also from our employees standpoint, to get them engaged with giving. So we do lots of community events where the employees and our teammates get a chance to get engaged, and it just a tremendous impact. I can't put in words the impact that it's had on our culture, where you love to be part of Coke. I mean, I've been there full time 8 months now, but like I said, I've been speaking for them for a couple of years, and I see a long season there. It's just such an exciting culture to be a part of.
Sure. Yeah, it's fun to be around. I've been up there a couple times, and every time I learn something, because they are just constantly innovating. They are pushing the envelope, and somehow manage to do it in a way that is legal and effective, right? So I remember one of the things that they mentioned regarding chaplaincy, that when Frank Harrison, the CEO, first made that decision to go with chaplaincy, I think they started it in 1 or 2 plants as kind of a test pilot to see how that would go. And at the end of, I want to say it was 6 months to a year, I'm not positive on that, but he asked the question of the plant manager, whoever's in charge there, what do you think about this chaplaincy deal? And the guy said, Frank, I don't know what your take is from where you are and how much you want to expand it, but if we get rid of it here, I'm going to have a mutiny.
Yes, and now he says that about 102 plants.
Exactly.
He said,
exactly.
no matter what budget change you ever make, that'd be the last change you would make, is eradicating our chaplaincy. It's had that big of an impact throughout the organization.
That's phenomenal.
That's incredible.
And we have a department, culture and care. It's a division in the company and does similar to what Chris does to smaller companies to help put that operating system in place, to have a sustainable model where you can bring your whole self to work and really, it's so important to have that operating system in place and not just activities where you really can grow it and really have maximum impact.
Yeah, that's huge.
For sure. So for the CEO, business leader, entrepreneur that's watching along and listening, and maybe they're starting to get excited. They never thought about this before. They never thought they could bring their faith to work and live out that. How should they get started? What should they start to do today? Is there a resource, a book? Obviously, TFactor's a resource. What would you recommend?
Well, I would recommend, and because we're seeing so many success stories, literally each week we're through our follow-up, we're hearing more and more success stories, that I'd recommend that TFactor is a good place to start. We have a website, tfactor.com, t-factor.com, T standing for transformation. And it's a great place to start. And in TFactor, you're going to learn about his way of work. You're going to learn about corporate chaplaincy, and you're going to learn about a lot of things that we talked about here today. But I think it's a great place. It's a great place to start, and I highly recommend it.
Yeah, and we do too as well.
Yeah.
What's the big takeaway you think from this chat that we've had? It's been incredible just hearing your story. I appreciate your generosity. Mm-hmm. But what do you think that those who have been listening and watching should take away from this?
Two things I'd like to leave with. One, a little bit on the personal testimony that I'm going to get a takeaway on about the culture and TFactor. But from a personal testimony, when the movie came out in 2009, Matt Damon, my identical twin. You can see why me and I look just alike. Well, when that movie came out, I was doing an interview in California. My wife was doing one in New York. It was CBS News. And they interviewed my wife. And I'm watching her from California, 3 hour, different time zone. I'm watching her interview, CBS National News. And they asked my wife, Ginger, and they say, Ginger, why'd you stay? 99% divorce rate. Why'd you stay? And Ginger said, you know what? My flesh wanted to run. I wanted to leave. It was such a mess, but God told me to stay. God told me to love him unconditionally, even when there were times I didn't love him. Mm-hmm. She said, God told me to stay. So the divorce was not an option. She said, but murder was an option, and she considered it twice, right on national TV. And they said, well, when did you consider murder? She said, when he took a 6-month plea agreement and ripped it up in my face and said it was all my fault he was in that mess. And did 8.5 years instead. She said, I wanted to kill him when he took that plea agreement and ripped it up and fired that attorney. But she quickly said, they asked her then, interviewer said, Ginger, what would have happened if your husband signed that 6-month plea agreement? She said, I thought about that a lot over the years, over the decades. I think my husband would have came out the same greedy man that he came in. Amen. With a 6-month sentence. God gave him what he needed, which was 8.5 years in prison. Now, I think 2 years would have been enough. I would have liked to have been on that interview. I think 2 years would have been enough. But I do agree, 6 months, and my kids agree. My kids are all older now than I was, our 3 kids, older than I was when I was wearing a wire. So that's how long ago it was for us. But we all agree 6 months would have not, I wouldn't have listened to a Chuck Colson or an Ian Howes with a 6-month sentence. I had to be broken, and 8.5 year sentence will break you. So there's no doubt in my mind, sometimes what's best, we think, for us from a fleshly standpoint is not what's best for God's plan. This was best. I was able to disciple guys, be a servant leader in prison. I learned more about God because I had 24 hours a day free time, more about God than I ever could have. I used that time wisely. It was not wasted time. So that's a takeaway that, God can use adversity in good way. He used that adversity from an ashes to beauty, especially with the adversity that our listeners are going through right now. Even though I realize this adversity I brought on myself, not like COVID, that they had nothing to do with. I'm still making a point. God can use that adversity. Romans 8:28, he will use it all. Yeah. All things will work together for good for those who love the Lord and live according to his purpose. But the other thing I'd like to take away is to state is that there's no better place for ministry than right where you're at. The marketplace is the best place for ministry. Even Billy Graham years ago in an interview, he made a comment in an interview. He said that the next revival will happen in the marketplace. And I really believe that this is ministry. You don't have to quit your job and go join a mission, or, I mean, that's great, the people that do that. I love,
Sure.
I have friends that are on mission trips and are missionaries, but we're also missionaries right where we're at work too.
That's right.
Yeah.
And as senior leaders and as executives. And no better place to be a missionary right in the positions that God has us in the marketplace. That's the key takeaway, to integrate your faith in your work and look at it as if the business is God's, your finances is God's, and be a good steward for that. What would God want you to do with what he's given you?
Perfectly said.
Powerful.
Yeah.
Absolutely powerful. Thank you so much, Mark, for your generosity and just spending the time with us to share your story and share your passion. It's so evident that it's something that you believe to your core. And my hope is those who are listening and watching will just catch that infectious spirit and take it to their workplace. Check out TFactor, check out his way at work, all the partners that you guys have, and really just start to make some steps in their business. No, so
Well, thank you for having me.
thank you
Very
so much.
So. Thank
It's
you.
been a pleasure.
Yeah, it's been an absolute pleasure. And thank you, everyone, for watching and listening along. We're just excited to have you on this journey, listening to all these CEOs and business leaders that we've had on. It's just been a pleasure. But this has been a great one. It's just
Absolutely.
absolutely as advertised. So until next time, we'll see you then.